we're here tonight with Dr. Larry Rosen, and Dr. Rosen was our keynote presenter today at the Council on Chemical Abuse's annual conference. And I want to give you a little bit of information about Dr. Rosen. He is a professor and past chair of the psychology department at California State University in California. Over the past 25 years, Dr. Rosen and his colleagues have examined reactions to technology among more than 30,000 people in the United States and in 22 other countries. He has written 5 books. Is it 5? Yes, 5 books, including Eye Disorder. If you're interested, we have copies of Eye Disorder out there. The gentleman up here is reading it right now. It's Eye Disorder, Understanding Our Obsession with Technology and Overcoming Its Hold on Us. Also, Rewired, Understanding the I Generation and the Way They Learn. Me, MySpace, and I, Parenting the Net Generation. Techno Stress, Coping with Technology at Work, at Home, at Play. And the Mental Health Technology Bible. And writes a technology column for newspapers, The National Psychologist, and a regular blog for the magazine Psychology Today. Dr. Rosen has been featured extensively in television, print, and radio media, and has been a commentator on Good Morning America, NPR, and CNN. He has been quoted in hundreds of magazines and newspapers, including USA Today, the New York Times, Newsweek, Time, Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Dr. Larry Rosen.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is talk about the psychology of technology, and I thought I would give you a little bit of a background. I started my career as a mathematics major in college, and I made it all the way to my senior year before I realized that math sucked, and that teaching math to other kids sucked, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went around exploring what other fields used math and where I could do something that seemed much more interesting, and ended up finding psychology, and found that it was fascinating and interesting. And when I became a professor, it was just about the time that huge computers were being used. And most of you are way too young to remember this, but we used to use key punch cards where we would, the old people go, yeah, I remember those, where I used to punch these cards that you could hold up and you could look through them and see the light through them. And very early in my teaching career, I taught a statistics class, and students hate statistics anyway. But the first day I said, we're in for a treat this semester. It's going to be really fun. We're going to do our statistics on the computer, so you don't need any calculators. This computer's going to do everything. And I showed them the machines that they were going to use and how easy and fun it was going to be. And the next class period, half the students had left. And I knew it wasn't me. It turned out it was the computers. So almost 30 years ago, I started studying something called computer phobia. And since then, I've evolved in the way I look at technology, but basically it's always surrounded how people react to technology. So what you're going to hear today is sort of an up-to-date modern view of how our world works technologically. And I'm going to start by talking to you about different generations and how different generations relate to technology differently. I'm going to talk about the kinds of technology that different generations use, the different styles of communication, how we're all going crazy multitasking and task switching, our values, our beliefs, and then we're going to talk about the teenage brain, and then I'm going to talk about why it's all making you crazy. So we are right now in the middle of 5 or maybe 6 or maybe who knows how many generations. People who study generational differences all agree that the silent generation started in the mid-20s and ended in the mid-40s, and the baby boomer generation started in the mid-40s and ended in the mid-60s. After that, they didn't know what to call generations. So based on a science fiction novel, they decided, well, let's use the letter X. It stands for unknown in mathematics, and so why not call it Generation X, because we have no idea what they're going to be like. And so Generation X started in '65, and most people believe it ended in the late 70s, somewhere 79, 78, 80. And after that, nobody agrees on anything. And we always argue about generational differences and similarities. But I'm of the mind that generations should not be labeled by either letters or when they arose, but by what their common technology, the common theme of that generation is. So we call the generation born roughly in the 80s as the net generation after the internet. The generation that was born and raised in the 90s, the I generation with the little I for all the personalized individual devices like iPhones and all those things. And then we're starting now to study this generation of young kids born in the year 2000, and we're calling them Generation C, not because it's a random letter, but because this generation probably will be, already is, and will be the most connected generation ever. Notice, by the way, that generations are getting smaller and shorter. And the reason we believe it's getting smaller and shorter is because technology. I hope you like comic strips. I'll read these if you can't see them. On the left, the teacher says, on the board it says, what I did on my holidays, and the teacher, the kid in the front row says, can I just email you a link to my blog, teacher? And on the right, it's first smile, first wave, first steps, first text message, and the parents saying, oh, we're so proud. And part of what is happening in our world is the pace of technology has exploded. And people who study consumer purchases talk about something called penetration rate. And that's when a technology or an idea hits 50 million people. They say it has penetrated society. So for example, radio took 38 years to penetrate society. Long time. Those people who grew up around radio realized that somebody had a radio on the block, everybody crowded around. It took a long time for people to get their own radio and for it to penetrate society. The telephone took 20 years. Television only took 13. Cell phones took 12. And then when World Wide Web hit, everything went crazy. It took only 4 years to penetrate society. iPods took only 3. Blogs took only 3. MySpace took 2.5. Facebook took only 2. YouTube took just 1 year to penetrate society to hit that 50 million point. And Angry Birds took 35 days. 35 days, 50 million people were playing Angry Birds. So you can understand that our world has changed rapidly. I mean, if you look back in the old days, technologies took a while to filter into society. We had time to think about them. We had time to integrate them into our lives. Now there's no time. They just show up. And as an example, if you look at all those technologies on the board, not one of them existed before the year 2000. And every single one of those is a very common technology that is used by most people. Those have penetrated society. And people use them all at the same time. I don't know if you get this comic strip in your newspapers that you do. This is called Zits. My favorite comic strip. This is Jeremy. Meet Jeremy. He's about 16 perennially. And this is his bewildered dad. You'll see his bewildered mom later. But his dad says, hey, Jeremy, what are you watching? And Jeremy says, on which screen? Because he's got the television on, his laptop on, and he's got his phone screen. Part of what is really important in this day and age, and I think part of what defines the new generation, particularly the last two generations, the I generation and Generation C, is that much of their life is spent behind screens. It's behind a glass screen. And when people wonder why there is cyberbullying, why there are Facebook wars, hold up a screen to yourself. Hold up your phone screen. What do you see? You see the reflection of you. You don't see what's through the screen at the other end. And so kids that bully other kids online, for example, can do so very easily because behind that screen, they're somewhat anonymous. People can't see them, and so they believe they don't know who they are. It turns out to be very important. Sometimes technology just doesn't make any sense, particularly to old people. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask, how many people in here, anybody from the silent or traditional generation, born mid-20s to mid-40s? Baby boomer generation, besides myself, very good. Generation X, 1965 to 79. How about the net generation born in the 80s? And any I generation born in the 90s? Okay, good, good. No Generation C born in the new millennium here? No? Oftentimes I have people bring their kids with them, so. So this is the teacher the first day saying, copy and study this list of text messaging spelling words. We'll have a test tomorrow. And I'm sure that most of you know at least LOL and most of these. How many people know what POS means? People who know aren't saying, right? People who know aren't going to say. Yes? Parent over shoulder. This is a text messaging acronym that people do use. If you're a parent, you should be aware of that one. It's also, the other equivalent is P911. And they certainly see the world differently. So this kid's saying, Mom, I built my first snowman, and he built it on a phone. This person's saying, there aren't any icons to click, it's a chalkboard, and the kid doesn't know what to do. And down here, no, sweetheart, not everything is touchscreen. She's trying to touch the screen. And so we live in this kind of interesting world, and these little kids growing up are growing up thinking everything is a touch screen, that they ought to be able to touch anything and make it work. So the question, and the research question that I study always is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, it is the future, and I'm going to try to show you where it's good or bad or both. So what we do is we study, among other things, generational similarities and differences, and generations differ on all of these areas. They differ on how much they use media, how much they multitask, how they communicate, how they socialize, certainly, the kinds of content they create, all of their values, whether they're values towards school or work, and how they learn. So what do they do with their media? If you look on the left, what you see are the three major generations that are in the workplace. I'll give you some other information on the younger generations in a second. But we collect information every year on each generation, and we look at several things. First of all, we look at how much daily media they consume. So baby boomers consume almost 8 hours a day of media. Gen X, we're up to almost 15. Net generation, 20.5 hours. Now, obviously, that's impossible. And the reason it's impossible, as you well know, is because nobody consumes one of these forms of media by itself. Everybody consumes them while multitasking, while doing more than one thing. In our studies, we always ask individually. So we might ask, how many hours a day do you watch TV? How many hours a day do you listen to music? We don't ask if you're watching TV with your earbuds in and listening to music at the same time you're watching TV. We know you are. So what's interesting is if you look at the different generations and you look at their preferences, meaning this is the top medium form, second, third place, fourth place, and we could go on. But baby boomers, the top form of media is TV and music, still the traditional forms. The third one is being on a computer. This is not being online. This is simply using a computer, word processing, spreadsheets, whatever. And then the fourth is being on the phone. If you look at Generation X, it looks similar. Music takes first position, computer takes second position, TV is shoved down into third, but now being online turns out to be important. And if you look at the net generation, born in the 80s, music and TV are still number 1 and 2, but going online and texting now show up as important activities. When you look at the younger generation, everything changes. And this is the youngest of the younger generation. The little one says, no, Grandma, listen, double-click the Internet Explorer icon. I used to use this one because I thought it was funny, but I told this story this morning that when I have a computer question, I email a friend of mine. His name is Mike. And I ask him a question, I type him a question, and he will email me back, usually pretty quickly. He's a pretty good emailer. And he'll email me back and he'll say, Larry, nice to hear from you. That's a good question. If you look at this link first and read it, it'll explain the answer, and then email me and I can walk you through it. And he's very good at it, and he's 10. And he's been my computer consultant since he was 9. I didn't know him when he was 8, otherwise he would have been my consultant then. This is a typical Gen C kid. They know way more about technology than any of us do, and they use it way more than any of us do. So in this case, the teacher says, today I'm going to show you how to use a pencil sharpener. Are there any questions before I begin? And my friend Mikey would then say, yeah, I just texted them to you. So what are they doing with their media? Again, this is the same look, except now we split it into 4 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 15, and 16 to 18. And you notice that when we get to the little ones, it's pretty much TV and video games occupy most of their time. And notice the time, they still spend 5.5 hours with technology, working your way all the way up to the older teenagers that are at 20.5 hours. When you get to the 9 to 12-year-olds, video games seem to be prominent. 9 to 12-year-olds are masters of video gaming. They play more video games than any other age group at all. When you get to the 13 to 15-year-olds, music still takes most importance, but now texting is number 2, being online is number 3, and when you get into the 16 to 18-year-olds, music, texting, being online, and IM and chatting. So really it changes as you go across generations. And the younger generations are spending more time communicating. These are all communication tools that they're using. And they communicate differently. This is Jeremy's mom saying, Jeremy, why aren't you answering your phone? He says, it's probably nothing. How do you know? What if it's important? And you should know the punchline. If it was important, they would text me. And that's true. I can tell you from personal experience, my daughter who's 22 and just graduated college, I'm sure on the icon for her phone where it says how many messages she has, it's topped out at as many as you're allowed to have because she never answers her phone. She never looks at her messages because if somebody calls, she lets it go to voicemail, and then she texts them and says, what did you want? And then she expects them to text back and say, this is what I wanted, and back and forth and back and forth. If I actually want to talk to her, I have to text her. She and I had a text conversation going on today. What time are you free? Blah, blah, blah. Can we talk? Yes. What time should we talk? Okay, I'll call you at such and such a time. That's the only way she'll talk to me. And it's not that she's a bad kid. She's actually a good kid. She just doesn't believe in telephones. And trust me, that box, that little box that we all carry in our pockets is not a telephone. They call it a smartphone, but the phone is one of the least common activities on that device. The Nielsen Company, I don't know if you're familiar with the Nielsen Company, but they're the ones that do the television ratings. And they put boxes on your televisions or give you a diary to keep about what TV shows you're watching. And the goal is to figure out how many Americans are watching different kinds of TV shows. They also, since early 2007, have been collecting about 60,000 cell phone bills from teenagers every quarter. And they take the cell phone bills and they total up how many telephone calls you made and received and how many text messages you sent and received. And they do it every quarter, so through 2007, 8, 9, and then the most recent data are September 2011. And you can see the telephone calls have pretty much stayed even or gone down from 255 down to 196 now. But text messaging has become absolutely important, such that as of late last year, the average teenager sends and receives 3,417 texts a month, unless you're a girl, and then you're up to almost 4,000. How many people text actively? How many texts do you send a month? Send and receive.
I have no idea, honestly.
How many pages is your phone bill? 100?
No, because I have unlimited texting.
Yeah, but it's still listed. Even if you have unlimited texting.
I don't read the bill myself, you know?
What's your guess? How many do you think you do a day?
A day?
Yeah. 50?
Probably like 100.
100 a day. So multiply 100 by...
Because it's mostly my mom.
That's fine. Still texting. So multiply 100 by 30 and you're right up there.
At least 20 times today. Like back and forth.
Back and forth. See, texting has become the #1 communication modality for the younger generation. When you look at the younger generation, we look at the older generations, the #1 modality is face-to-face, followed by the phone, followed by email, for both of the two generations, both baby boomers and Gen Xers. When you get down to the younger generations, net generation, face-to-face is still #1, but texting all of a sudden becomes #2. When you get to the I generation, texting is #1, instant messaging, Facebook, and phone is #2, and face-to-face is a distant third. So no wonder kids are texting all the time rather than calling, because the phone is really not a great choice for them. By the way, parents always ask me, why won't my kid call me on the phone? My answer is always the same. Because if they're on the phone, they have to unitask, meaning they have to talk to you and listen to you. They can't do anything else unless they subtly type and do things like that. If they text you, there's time between when they send the text and when you text back that's all theirs. Did you have a question?
No, I had a comment, like that's true. Like I have to set aside time to call my grandma because she'll be on the phone for like 10 or 15 minutes. And she'll, like, I have to set aside time, like I don't have enough time. I call her like once every 2 weeks because I don't have enough time to talk to her. Like,
Right,
daily.
because 15 minutes is exceedingly valuable, right?
Well, like.
Think of all the other things you could do in 15 minutes.
No, because she'll talk
I'm kidding.
to me longer than I ever need her to. Like, I'll try and write a paper and she'll be like on the phone. I'll be like, okay, bye, Grandma. And then she'll start talking about something else. I'm like, Grandma.
This is why the younger generations do not like to talk on the phone. You just answered my question for me. So, is this part of multitasking madness? I did not take the picture on the right, but a friend of mine sent it to me. His kid was so engrossed in a game that she was playing that she was being potty trained, and so she went in and took her laptop with her. And this little kid is actually about 1.25 years and has both phones and is talking to one grandma on that phone and one grandma on that phone so that she could talk to both at the same time. In one study we did, we asked teens, how often do you switch from studying to doing something technological? Meaning checking your messages, answering a text, looking at websites, watching TV, listening to music, anything technological. From the left to the right, you have 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. This is the ones that say very often they do it. This is the ones that say somewhat often. This is the total. You can see that we're looking at roughly 80% of all teenagers believe that it's okay to switch from what you're doing to anything else at the same time. We call this continuous partial attention, meaning you pay partial attention here, then you pay partial attention here, then you move back and pay partial attention here, then you go to a third thing and pay a little bit of attention, and a little bit of attention, and a little bit of attention, and a little bit of attention. Can you do it? Well, you try. When we move from the youngest kids to the baby boomers, there is a steady increase in the number of things that people say they can do at the same time. Doesn't mean they can, but they say they can do it at the same time, peaking at the 16 to 18-year-olds who believe they can do 7 things at the same time. So which ones can you do? How many people can surf the internet and listen to music at the same time? Should be most of you, I would assume. How about read a book and listen to music at the same time? Older people can't do that. All the older people are going, you can do that too?
Too bad, I'm older.
Good for you. I'm impressed. I can't do that at all. How about eating and playing a board game? Should be pretty simple, right? How about reading a book and watching TV? Yeah, a lot of people try that. Most of my students study in front of the TV.
Would you be reading a book like that we read for enjoyment?
Any
or
book.
A book that we're reading because we're here?
Any book.
Because that's two completely different
Okay.
kinds of reading.
Can you read a book for enjoyment and watch TV?
Yeah.
Can you read a school book and watch TV?
No.
Do you ever do it?
No, because I can't.
Very good. See, you're very sensible. When I talk about metacognition, I'm going to tell you you got it. How about read a book and talk on the phone? That one should be more difficult, although I know people try it, but that should be more difficult. How about read a book, text, Facebook, and listen to music with the TV on? There's one hand, one honest person here. If I ask a class of high school students, which I will day after tomorrow, I'm going to be speaking to some high school students. If I ask a class of high school students if they can do that, every single kid raises their hand. Every single kid believes they can do that.
I think that happens sometimes depending on how they're reading. If they're reading a book and it's on their phone or their iPad or their iPod, or, well, all the texting, Facebook, and music is going to pop up, so they're going to bounce back and forth.
Right. And they believe they can do them all at the same time, even though they're not. They're actually not doing them at the same time, which I'll tell you what they're doing. So here is again Jeremy's mom. Jeremy, why did you get a D on your chemistry test? Because I couldn't study for it. Why couldn't you study for it? Because my iPod battery was dead. And I love this one. It's like she's just staring at him like, what are you talking about? He says, you can't study without an iPod, Mom. And she says, yeah, Mendeleev managed to organize the periodic table. She's always bewildered by poor Jeremy. So how do students study? This has always been an interest of mine because I watch students studying in the library, and I laugh because they're studying and they've got the earbuds in and they've got music on, or they've got their phone and they're constantly checking their phone and texting. So we decided to do a study where we went into 279 students' homes, middle school, high school, college homes. We told the students, we would like to observe you studying something important for 15 minutes, that's all, just 15 minutes. We said, what we're going to do is observe you. We're just going to sit behind you. We gave them some practice. We said, you know, just get used to us. We're going to be sitting behind you, observing. And what they didn't know is what we were observing. And what we observed was, were they on task or off task? Meaning, they said they were going to study X, were they studying X? Did they have any technology on? iPod, TV, computer screen, whatever. If they had a computer screen on, how many tabs were open? How many windows were open? What window was in the main screen? What was the one they were mainly looking at? Did they have any study strategies? Did they develop any study strategies for studying? And Do they have a preference for what's called task switching, meaning doing one thing, switching to the other, going back, switching, versus doing one thing, finishing it, moving to the next, moving to the next, moving to the next. And then we also asked them what their grade point average was. And what we did is every single minute, from minute 1 to minute 15, we observed whether they were on task or not and what technology was in the background. So here's what you see. For the first couple of minutes, they're focused, roughly. And then they get distracted. And then they focus again. And then at 8 to 9 to 10 minutes, they get very distracted. And then they focus again, but we think this is kind of an artifact because we think they figured, oh, wait, the 15 minutes is coming to an end. Damn, I better look like I'm studying so they don't think I'm dumb. And so they started studying again, but they couldn't even hang on to it to the 15th minute, and they start to fall off. And studies have shown that this is not unique to high school, middle school, and college students, that when they look at computer programmers, people in a job programming computers, 3 to 5 minutes of focus before they switch to something else. Even medical students studying, 3 to 5 minutes before they switch to something else, and that something else is almost always something technological. We did give them the option to tell us they switched to go get something to eat, or to get a drink, or a cup of coffee, or an apple, or whatever. That happened, but not very much. Mostly they were distracted by technology. And if you look at how many windows on their computer were open, you notice that they start increasing and increasing and increasing until that sort of magic 8 to 9 minute, 10 minute time when they have the maximal number of windows open, and then it tails back off again. And of course, the students who were most off task had the most windows open. Then the other thing we wanted to do was ask, could you take just 15 minutes of study time and predict their grade point average? So we said, sure, why don't we try that? And we actually found 5 predictors that predicted their grade point average. If they stayed on task more, they had a better grade point average. I don't know if that's a life lesson or not. You should stay on task longer so you'll get a better grade point average. If they had study strategies specifically for studying, they had a better grade point average. If they preferred task switching, meaning working on something for a little bit, switching to this, switching back, they had worse grade point average. If they consumed more media during the day, they had a worse grade point average. And if they checked Facebook just once during the 15 minutes, they had a worse grade point average. All it took was once, and that was the only website of all of them that led to a worse grade point average. Talk about that later as what that is. So why do people do it? Why do people switch from something to something else? There's 2 reasons. One's internal and one's external. The internal one's called a human orienting response. It's biological. If I had a piece of paper balled up in my pocket and I threw it at you like this, you would probably knock it away, even if you weren't paying attention. It's called a human orienting response. You are aware all the time of stimuli in your environment. It's adaptive. It's so you don't get bricks falling on your